Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Barn of Sidious. Solid intangibles and ephemeral tangibles. A fantasy satirist perhaps put the idea best when in Terry Pratchett's The Hogfather, Death says to Susan Stowe Heelett, his own adoptive, quote, daughter, the following: "Take the universe and grind it down to the finest powder, then sieve it through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy." It's a bloody beautiful line, and sadly, like so many things on Reddit and other nihilistic lefty-dominated spaces online and in academia, it often gets misused or misread as meaning that Death is trying to demonstrate that human concepts like justice, mercy, and duty are not inherent in the universe, but are merely human constructs that humans use to self-soothe. I find this both reprehensibly misguided, as well as clueless about how these things manifest beyond humanity. It's particularly something that should be noted that Death himself, in several of the Discworld novels, talks about the duty, his own duty. And he's not exactly human, now is he? Additionally, these collectivist midwits have demonstrated a cartoonishly simplistic view of another part of this scene between Death and Susan, wherein Death says, and I'm paraphrasing here, I haven't read the book in a few years, humans have to start off believing the little lies before they can move on to the big ones. Otherwise, how can those other beliefs ever become? And he stops there at the word become, allowing the reader to draw their own inference. This puts me in mind of the axiom, fake it until you make it. It's a terrible phrase as presented because it seems to encourage lying or deception at first. But I believe this fails to really grapple with the back end of that axiom, make it. Before anyone inquires, yes, I do chalk this up to the notion of tulpa mechanics, referred to also as spontaneous instantiation, or in more hippie woo-woo speak, manifesting. However, I don't buy into the 100% hippie woo-woo kind of manifesting. I'm talking here about the kind that requires actual effort, repetition, training, devotion, and experimentation. The sort that requires, a sense of ritual. In Hogfather, Death is talking about intangible but very real facets of existence that require real, raw effort, but whose process results are often intangible. For instance, mercy. If you're walking along and a homeless bum comes begging you for change, and you think about giving him some, well, you're having a merciful thought, but until you give him the tangible thing, you have not exercised mercy. It's an intangible result that requires tangible action. I'm aware that this example might seem more suited to the concept or term charity, but I would argue that charity is itself a form of mercy. I'm willing to discuss or debate that point at some time, if anyone were so inclined. Death's point is not that the big lies are lies at all, I suspect. Given Sir Terry Pratchett's body of work as a whole, which often displays an appreciation of or for faith structures, I suspect the Reddit crowd has once more failed to separate the art from the artist. "But Pratchett was my atheist. Him was a humanist." This is true and accurate despite my mockery. Yes, but fails entirely to observe that Pratchett himself stated clearly that he was not an anti-theist, further clarifying that he personally had not been convinced, but that this was not proof positive of anything more than his own inability to be convinced. We know from zoological studies and observation that mother deer will taunt and lead predators on a hopeless chase away from their own young. Bucks will stand and fight those same predators to buy time for their mates and offspring to flee. Mother bears will fight damn near anything to shield their cubs. This is duty and sacrifice, and it is brutal, but it is natural. Elephants bury their fallen kin. They grieve. If a predator fells an elephant, their kin nearby will try to kill that predator. That is a form of justice. Brutal, yes, but justice in the form of revenge. In wolf packs, if a lower-ranked male accosts the lead female, that male wolf is driven out of the pack, or usually they are slaughtered outright. That is punishment or vengeance, an intangible truth meted out with rage, claws, and teeth. What of love, my friends? And not just romantic love, the sort so frequently dismissed by sneering cynics and skeptics as a trick of the evolutionary impulse or drive to reproduce, but familial or friendly love, love of country or tribe. So as to preempt the skeptics before they chirp up about hardwired in-group preferences, I would quickly point out that, politically speaking, you are usually the exact same crowd preening so self-righteously about the dangers of such hard-coded natural impulses and claiming that diversity is our strength, so shut the fuck up. Now, I've spent all this time covering the solid intangibles, as I dub some of them. Honor is another one, but I confess that at this time I need more time to stew on that one. At this point, I'd like to pivot and touch upon two ephemeral tangibles, known and acknowledged truths for which we have proof of existence, but only seem to notice in the form of the result. The first of these two ephemeral tangibles is the big one: corruption. This singular, ugly, awful word in the English language is versatile, and its consequences are often disastrous, sometimes outright lethal. Stemming from corruptio in the Latin, the present form first saw common use in 14th century English, mostly among scholars of medicine and science, to describe rot, decay, and atrophy in animals. It was a physically observed state, a result of organic matter deteriorating and breaking down, falling apart. The specifics were not as finely understood then as they are now, obviously, but the concept held metaphorical power beyond application to the material even before this time frame. When political operatives make financial moves based upon insider knowledge, is this not referred to often as corruption? If judges sentence juveniles to specific detention facilities with the understanding that they'll get a financial kickback, isn't this also an example of corruption? If a social movement ostensibly established to achieve one end expands to include secondary goals and beyond, in an effort to ensure that the movement continues, caring less any longer for the initially stated goal, is this not also corruption? If linguistic frameworks are slowly, subtly shifted and changed to increase ambiguity and deniability instead of decreasing them, how is that not corruption? The effects of corruption become more and more glaring the longer it goes uncontested or unabated. But the whole while, it is there, undeniably, an ephemeral, tangible thing. The second ephemeral tangible I wish to touch upon for this piece is one that is much simpler and straightforward, at least initially, and that is pain or suffering. Pain is, much like corruption, something that often gets described in subjective terms, owing in large part to its variety of sources and various life forms' ability to handle it. For instance, if you've ever been to the ER or urgent care for a malady or injury that didn't render you unconscious, the intake nurse almost universally asks you to, quote, rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Medical professionals are, by and large, entirely aware that this rating is pure subjectivity, and they are trying to get a sense of the patient's concept of tolerance for continuing on in their current state. Obviously, a man coming into the ER with a knife sticking out of his hand, gritting his teeth and responding with a 1 through 4 on this scale, is either being proudly dishonest, is on some sort of drugs, or has seen a world of awful before this visit. In any of these circumstances, his subjective measure offers an idea of what sort of patient they've got on their hands. Suffering/pain is not merely raw and physically obvious, however. Psychological or spiritual suffering can often be just as devastating, or more so, than physical damage, and these wounds do not heal or scar over in the clean, observable ways that those clear injuries do. However, like physical wounds, spiritual or psychological suffering is tolerated by different people in variable degrees and capacities. Obviously, I'm not speaking to anything that hasn't already been observed and discussed throughout history by philosophers, theologians, or semioticists throughout time. Without hesitation, I imagine that anyone who has studied those areas with any degree of serious academic or autodidactic rigor for at least half a year would tell you that I'm not breaking new ground here. What I am striving for, however, is to do so in such a way that these ideas pick up a new echo for a new day, because they are worthy of continued or renewed consideration. That's all for now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.